October 15, 1887. Boston Evening Transcript, Boston, Massachusetts. The road to the asylum. How easy it is for people in general, and even for experts, to assume that persons are insane when they are not, is proved by the case of an amateur feminine lunatic whom, under the name of Nellie Brown, the New York world has succeeded in getting through Judge Duffy's court, through a battery of medical experts in Bellevue Hospital, and, finally, into the insane asylum at Blackwell's Island. Nellie Brown is a girl reporter who was employed by the world to personate a lunatic, doubtless for the primary purpose of making a sensation rather than to lay bare any abuses, but she has told her adventures in the world so fully and vividly that the story is made to yield some instructive facts. On September 23, the girl strayed into a temporary home for females in New York City, having taken care to have nothing about her that should identify her, and there began to assume, quite cleverly it would seem, the airs of a harmless lunacy. She was turned over to the police and taken before Judge Duffy, who, according to her story, showed no disposition whatever to undue haste or snap judgment in convicting her of insanity. Everybody else, however, seemed inclined to hasten her steps to the insane asylum, which is interesting as showing the tendency of people in general to accept the smallest outward signs as conclusive evidence of insanity. Judge Duffy suspected foul play and had the girl sent to Bellevue Hospital for examination. In the insane ward there, she was treated as already condemned. She was roughly handled, she says, by one male attendant. "You might as well know it now as later," said a brutal nurse. "You are in an asylum for the insane, and it will be a long time before you get out." The doctors examined her with great gravity. One of them inspected the whites of her eyes and pronounced her insane. Another asked her impertinent questions, which she said she did not understand. "Positively demented," said he. "I consider it a hopeless case." How slender a thread of scientific demonstration a conviction of insanity rests upon. In the meantime, the curiosity of the ever-present reporters had been awakened. Nellie Brown was pretty, with high-bred airs, and Judge Duffy's expressed suspicion of foul play had made them prick up their journalistic ears. They dogged her steps and wrote brisk articles about her under the headings, "The Nellie Brown Mystery." Her memory clouded, her memory still gone, the beautiful wreck, and so on, so that the story does not depend wholly upon her evidence in her world narrative. To make the long story short, the girl, still feigning insanity simply by demanding all sorts of impossible things, telling weak, conflicting stories about herself, and assuming blank airs of forgetfulness of everything, was sent to Blackwell's Island as a hopeless lunatic. Once in the asylum, she gave up, under her prearranged program, all signs of insanity. Her plan was to appear entirely sane, in order to demonstrate the difficulty that a sane person may have in escaping from an asylum when once incarcerated. Her detailed narrative of this part of the experience is still wanting, but she was kept at Blackwell's Island only from September 26 to October 7, when she was released on a bond offered by one Hendrick, an attorney, that she would be properly taken care of. She says she is convinced that there were several women in the asylum as sane as she is, a statement which does not, however, count for much. The New York Sun has taken the trouble to follow up Nellie Brown's narrative with inquiries from people with whom she came in contact in the various stages of her progress. These inquiries confirm the main points of her statement. She evidently did her mystifying with a great deal of enjoyment of the proceedings, and not to have been above a little incidental captivating of those she met. This young woman's case establishes one fact at least, that the appearance of certain outward signs of insanity may be very promptly followed by incarceration in an asylum. Of course, the case of a sane person who cleverly counterfeits insanity is very different from that of one who may be sane and insists upon being regarded as sane, but who has certain outward eccentricities that may afford evil-disposed persons a pretext for their confinement in an insane asylum. Blackwell's Island authorities seem to be entirely blameless in this case. They say of Nellie Brown, Her acts and talk for the first few days confirmed the statements the certificate contained. She did things and said things for which we could find no rational explanation. The plain inference, therefore, was that she was insane and was under some delusion. But the readiness with which her path to the asylum was made clear for her and, above all, the easy confidence of the Bellevue experts in their judgment, suggests anew the conclusion that too much caution can scarcely be employed in examining into the medical condition of persons who are brought forward for incarceration in asylums. April 28, 1893. The Girard Grit, Girard, Ohio. Her brother. A brother of Nellie Bly talks interestingly, tells some things about his famous sister not generally known. It was the pleasure of the Grit editor to have a most interesting conversation last Tuesday with a brother of our famous little newspaper woman Nellie Bly. E. J. Cochran, of the Cleveland Baking Company, called on the trade Tuesday, and in conversation with the editor of the Grit, he incidentally remarked that he had a sister who had gained something of a reputation in the newspaper business, and in response to an inquiry concerning her name, he said, "Nellie Bly is my sister." Mr. Cochran is an affable gentleman of most pleasing address, and he talked interestingly of his famous sister. Her first work, he said, was on the Pittsburgh Dispatch, and to that paper should be given the credit of bringing her out. Her first articles were on working girls, the initial one being written unbeknown to a single living soul except herself. For 3 months, she worked on the Dispatch without letting any of her family know of it except her mother. Then her brother learned of it by accident. He had been reading her interesting articles and had often wondered from whose pen they came, little dreaming that his sister, Pink, as she was called by her family, was the author. Elizabeth Cochran, Nellie Bly, is a little creature, but pure grit through and through, says her brother. She ruled the roost in her own home, detested housework, and spent nearly all of her time in reading and writing. Mr. Cochran recalled the Blackwell's Island episode, which he considers more heroic than her wonderful trip around the globe. It was in the interest of the New York World that Nellie Bly feigned insanity and was confined for 10 days in a madhouse on Blackwell's Island, having passed through the hands of 20 expert physicians in Bellevue Hospital and pronounced incurably insane. In those 10 days, the gritty girl suffered untold torture, but the result of her heroic undertaking was a complete expose of all the injustice and cruelty to which the insane were then subjected. For that single act, Nellie Bly should be forever called blessed, for she was the instrument whereby $1 million was appropriated for the betterment of the condition of the unfortunates who were confined within the walls of the asylum. In reply to an inquiry concerning the severment of her connection with the world, Mr. Cochran said grimly, "The world severed it. They pretended to give her a banquet at the Astor House, but, in reality, she was called to an upper room and asked to resign. No reason was given, except that now her reputation was made, she was of no further use to them." Mr. Cochran denounced this act as infamous. At present, Nellie Bly is connected with the family story paper. She has never fully recovered from the injuries received some years ago by being thrown from a horse. There were a dozen questions at the editor's tongue end, but A.E. Hartzell was waiting to give Mr. Cochran a big order for crackers, so the conversation ended.